Hello and welcome to the 800's. Uh, an overarching theme that people from all walks of life can appreciate is that no matter how far you travel, no matter where your life takes you, family will always be there for you.
And with that, welcome to this week's episode of the 800's. I am one of your co-hosts, Alex, and you just heard from my lovely co-host, Adam. Uh,
Lovely,
and
thank
we
you.
have Alan, working behind the scenes on tech to keep this lovely live stream going. So, with that, why don't we get a quick word from our sponsors and do a little plug work?
Yes, if you joined us before our beautiful faces showed up here, you heard Fearless First by Incompetech. That's found on incompetech.filmmusic.io. We use Incompetech for a lot of our projects, and they got a lot of great music. So check them out. Also, we have a YouTube channel, DM's Table. Check that out for other book club videos. Or if you're watching this on YouTube right now, go ahead and leave us a comment, and we can keep the communication and discussion going. Finally, I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I listen to all of my audiobooks through Audible, and if you'd like a free month, go to dmstable.com/audible. And also, how we decide what book to pick is we have a Patreon vote each 2 weeks, and we let our patrons decide what we're going to be reading and discussing. So if you want to say in what we read and you've got an extra $2 a month, then head over to Patreon and look up DM's Table. Should be a link somewhere on your screen as well. So check that out.
So this week on the 800's, we will be discussing the first of our books for Black History Month, The Travelers by Regina Porter, Dewey Decimal Designation 813.6. The Travelers is not one story, but many. Whole lives begin, end, and begin anew as a two-page cast of characters relate their interwoven stories. Regina Porter's novel delves into tales spanning from the end of World War II to the beginnings of the presidency of Barack Obama, but not quite in the ways one might expect.
Yeah, so that's The Travelers, and how this show goes, if you're joining us for the first time, is Alex and I will pitch a topic or question out there. We'll discuss it amongst ourselves, and we hope you guys watching will add in comments about what you think. We'll talk about our impression of the book, some literary values, different themes, stuff like that. If you guys have anything that you want to discuss, go ahead and leave it in the chat on the Twitch stream, and we'll snag it there, and we'll reach out and talk about whatever it is you wanted to talk about.
All right, and as usual, this is not intended to be a kid show entirely. We do cover some pretty heavy topics. This book in particular does have a couple little trigger warnings in it, so if there's anything you might not be comfortable with, we welcome discussion, but it does need to be civil discussion. And on that note, we also would like to recognize that we are two cis white men with a very limited perspective reviewing a book that has perspectives that we can only imagine through the writing of the author and through maybe stories we've heard. So if you have some you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Or if you disagree with something that we said or think it is inappropriate, we would love to know. Again, it was civil discussion because we want to learn if we can. But ultimately, we will not tolerate any sort of discrimination or negative speak from anybody else. So, as usual, be nice or fuck right off.
And also, this book was suggested for us by Alan, the man behind the scenes. So thanks, Alan. And without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Alex and anybody else, what was your first impression of the book?
Well, my first impression was, honestly, I was a bit confused. It's so far and away from everything that we have read so far that I really wasn't sure how to take it because I don't know, we're used to dealing with something that moves fairly chronologically. It has a very specific story to it. It may not have the satisfying ending, but this one was all over the place, and it kind of um, had to be. I mean, it was kind of like watching an artist do a painting from the very beginning. You see random brushstrokes, and it doesn't make any sense at all. But as they go, you kind of see bits filled in. You get little bits of detail here and there. I don't claim to understand it all because I'm not an art critic, but um,
I mean,
but yeah.
technically, I mean, since we've started this show, you kind of are an art critic.
I mean, a little bit, I guess, but like it felt a little out of place. But the more I read it, I felt like there was actually quite a bit to offer there. It's just I kind of had to spend a little time getting myself out of my usual headspace for reading these books like we do every week, every like couple of weeks. I personally enjoyed it, but it did take me a little while to fully get into it, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on it's totally different than what we normally read. Um, this I think this read a lot like a biography, but jumping all over the place, from character to character and time to time. For me, I've never read anything remotely resembling a biography, except for maybe something in school more than a decade ago. Gosh, school was more than a decade ago.
Whoops.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah. Well, grade school was more than a decade ago. How about that?
Yeah, that one's a bit rough.
I mean, technically, I'm still in school myself.
No, I know what you mean though.
But yeah, the listing of characters at the beginning was a unique way to start off a novel, not a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was a very daunting way to start things off, because right away I was like, oh God, what am I getting into? There's so many. Do I need to know these names? Do I need to know these people right now? Yeah, V.S. Drake. I thought it was a screenplay. I think one of the synopses I read is like, yeah, this is written like it's a screenplay. Porter has experience with screenplays. Yeah, I definitely thought like, oh, okay, this is going to be not a novel. It's going to be like, it's supposed to be a play. So yeah, for me, that was daunting, and I was worried from the get-go, though I did try and hold it together and not let my negative connotations about those first 2 pages weigh me down as the book got going.
Yeah, I like that you brought up that cast of characters at the beginning because I actually both physically read and read through audiobook this particular book, and I started off with just audiobook, and having that list of characters at the beginning, I was like, I can barely keep track of it on this 2 pages where it tells me where everything is.
Yeah.
How am I going to remember this throughout the entire book? And it almost got a little bit worse in that, like, it's not like it's chronological. It's not like
it's not like a list of order of characters or anything.
Yeah, the fact that it moves around the way that it does, I feel like that list would have been not just feel like, but that list was a lot more helpful when I read the physical book because I kept being able to refer back to it. But if you're just doing the audiobook of this, you just kind of have to keep it in memory because you're not going to keep flipping back to that first couple minutes. Let it read through 2 full pages of characters. And
yeah,
I mean, V.S. Drake mentions that he was worried about spoilers, and like I have a feeling that when an author puts that right at the beginning, they're not going to give you anything that's going to take away from the experience of the book.
It's
or
there
they,
for a reason.
well, it might be there specifically to lift that burden off of you so that you can focus on other things rather than focusing on these names and how they're interconnected, because they do it for you. They want you to focus on other themes, which we will hopefully get to at some point tonight.
I gotta say, my weakest aspect of reading books is remembering the characters' names. I don't know if you've noticed in the previous recordings of the 800s, but I tend to just say the main character, or that one guy, or the one girl in that one scene, because I'm either always terrified that I have the wrong name or I just don't remember it at all. So the
I
fact that
hadn't noticed at all and totally
yeah,
haven't done that myself.
yeah, same. The fact that this book, it was just like character central, was scary stuff to dive into.
Yeah, it's intimidating, but uh,
And one of the kind of tying in with V.S. Drake, hiding characters in the background. I think what I would have liked to see in those uh, character lists was relation, but then that kind of destroys some of the plot devices she used later in the novel to kind of tie people together without you realizing they're connected.
mhm.
So I don't know. I thought the character list was handy. Um, it would have been cool if there was more to it than just a list, but um, that's, I could go either way with that, I guess, because you do
I
destroy
mean,
some of that.
yeah, it does provide a purpose. I I think if you add too much more to it, though, you do start winding up like with V.S. Drake's worry of things that are spoilers. I think what it was meant to do is just to give you a way to reference them very briefly. It gives you a very quick connection, and then what that frees you up to do is to focus on the secondary, tertiary connections that these people have with each other, rather than focusing on the primary relationships that they have. And I think that actually goes into one of the things that I wanted to talk about as far as what this book offers is throughout the book, there's mention of this play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we start to see the significance of it. So I don't know about you, but I had to look this up because I had no idea what it was, but it kept popping up and popping up. So I did a little Google searching, and it turns out Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are two characters in the background of Shakespeare's Hamlet. They are literally two background characters, and it's the story of Hamlet from these two characters' perspectives. And these characters are like childhood friends of Hamlet himself. And, I think that's really what this book was all about. That's why I kept pulling it up, is you're basically seeing all of these people, people's stories, and then you get to see that same story through the eyes of somebody else, somebody who's in the background. Like that's why how they're interconnected, and that's why if you lift the burden of looking at the primary relationships, you start looking at those secondary and tertiary ones. You get to see the people in the background a little bit and how they are interconnected and how you can see them moving throughout each other's lives and the kind of weird perspectives you get out of it, which is why I thought it was so weird that it starts off with the perspective of a wealthy white man from a wealthy family, and this is a book that we initially got for Black History Month, and it's written by a Black female author.
Yeah. I think you nailed the head. You hit the nail right on the head there. Words are hard.
You got it out at some point.
You nailed the hit right on the head there. Yep.
Yes, V.S. Drake. Wow.
You can't smell through the screen. Anyway, Yeah. So yeah, the play is a great metaphor for I think the overarching theme of the book, which is kind of like what significance can you find in the background characters, not the people who share the spotlight, but those who support those who share the spotlight.
Mhm.
So yeah, I
You know,
think I
go
think
ahead.
so yeah, it was first introduced. Who is the guy? Here comes good naming, remembering the dad character who married the one of the main ladies. Um,
Are
do
you
you know who
talking
I'm
about
talking about?
Rufus?
The guy who
Or
initially had the play.
oh, that was Eddie Christie. He's the one who was
Yeah,
obsessed with it. He picked it up when he was in the Navy because there was not anything else to read, which
yeah,
is, it was like what basically that and the couple of, um, specifically black person oriented porn mags, I think was like
yeah,
Jet and
yep.
Ebony.
Yeah. So I think that metaphor works really well for Eddie because Eddie wasn't the main character in the love story. He was he was the guy. Um,
Who just
gosh,
kind
what's
of
his
stepped
name?
in.
Yeah, he just
Agnes. He was with Agnes.
yeah, he was the guy Agnes ran to when she wanted to escape. Like he was number two. So it's kind of I felt it was a really good way to introduce the play that he was the one obsessed with it and he was the one who was the second choice. He wasn't the spotlight of Agnes's life.
That's actually a really good. I hadn't thought about that until you just brought it up. But you're right. Like, not only did the Regina Porter, the author, introduce that play as like thematically underlying the tones of the entire book, she introduced it with the like you said, the perfect character for it. This guy who kind of was just in the background and, like V.S. Drake said, is right place, right time, and ended up having this profound impact, not just on Agnes's life, but on their children and the people their children married and their grandchildren, like to the point where his children could quote this very random play, like word for word. And um, sorry, I'm reading a couple questions from V.S. Drake here. Do you think that's why he was so closely attached to it? I We'll try and get both of these questions in, so I'm going to read them both, and we can answer them as we go. So, is that why he was so attached to it? Because he
because
knew.
he,
Because he knew what? If you could clarify that, but we'll try and answer the
I
first
think
one.
he means because he knew that he was the background character, the second choice. But what are
Maybe
your takes on it?
um, it might be. He might have latched onto it for bigger reasons. Well, not necessarily bigger, but more reasons than just that. I mean, he's also kind of the background character when he's in the military. Like he's one of three black men on the entire ship. Like, and naval ships have hundreds of people, and he was treated as a background character even then. So maybe that's what he was attached to as well when he picked it up. Is just, this speaks to me because I have my story. It means a lot more than the people who run the ship know. And I think it was also more than that, because from a mental health aspect, if you have something that anchors you, something that takes you away and provides you some sense of comfort in a clearly traumatizing scenario, which isn't what you'd think for somebody who was in the Navy.
Well,
Uh, V.S. Drake says, uh, represented as a, I'm not sure what he means, like what V.S. Drake means by not represented as a lot of people of color. Like, I mean, yeah, that a lot of people of color do have that issue where, or at least from what we were reading in the book, the people of color a lot of the times
I
do
think
wind up being background. characters to others, but
if I recall, they called out that there were a lot of Navy men, black Navy men present. It's just that he didn't interact with people that much. He only had the few people who he saw on a day to day that he talked to.
yeah,
But yeah,
I was misremembering. You're right. Like I guess I got caught up. I got caught up in his story of it because
yeah,
like it's so brief that he mentions that there are others there. It's just like it becomes his little world, and his little world only has the two or three in there, you know, and it's only those who interacted with the person that he ends up killing, you know. So
yeah. It was a great way to introduce Eddie, and I think um, that theme stayed with Eddie throughout his entire story. Uh, but for me, something I really liked about it is a lot of the wording chosen in this book was impactful. Like a lot of the naming and stuff was not bland. It was um, very vibrant naming, and like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are not like John, Mary. Yeah. The fact that uh, like it's I don't know I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but
no, I kind of get what you mean. Is that part of what made the characters feel as real as they did? Is they weren't generic names, nor were they names that were so outlandishly fantastical that you had to pay attention to them. There was just enough there, and each name had a story too, which was the interesting thing. You know, like the one that in particular comes to mind is Claudia. You know, you mentioned Eddie, not knowing whether Eddie figured out who, like if he knew he was that second person, uh, you know, like there's a clue in his own daughter that he wasn't,
yeah,
you know, because like there's a point where he says specifically, like when uh, Claudia was born, she was already named when he got there, and he even specifically mentions, "Oh, Claudia, that's not a family name." And his wife's just like, "I like it," and
butt
you
out.
know, but you know, it's that simple. But like that name has an established story with it, and it has depth because of the tale that came beforehand. You know, and we know what it means, but I'm not even sure that the character Claudia herself even knows, you know, how like the meaning behind it or anything. Um, V.S. Drake says he wants to know about our thoughts on the style of characters. V.S. Drake says that they seem to have a good critical flaw and a strong tie to at least one other person in the previous chapter or following chapter. That's actually a really good point, and one of the things that I took a little while to uh, get used to is that the order wasn't chronological. The order was connection related. Specifically, as V.S. Drake pointed out, the next story was related to the main character in some kind of tangential, secondary, or tertiary way from the previous one or to the next one, or in most cases, both, which is what I had to do to kind of tether this together as a single story and how I managed to keep myself sane while reading it. Because if you don't pick up on that, like it feels like you're a bit of a pinball in a pinball machine going all over the place.
Very
But
disjointed. Yeah.
yeah, but if you can see the lines and the strings connecting things a little bit better, it carries you along. And I thought that uh, Regina Porter did a good job of creating these characters in the background of somebody else's story and bringing them more and more to life. Because when she starts, much like my analogy with painting a picture, you're only getting the faintest outlines of their story because you're just getting the one, aside from I can't remember the guy's name, Jim or James, I think, the white guy that starts this story off. Aside from him, because you start off with his entire life story essentially.
Yeah.
James is confirmed by VS Drake. Thank you. Um, the man James. That's right. I knew there was something missing there. um,
And James.
yeah. So aside from starting out with his entire story, which at first I thought that's how this whole book was going to be, just like everybody's entire life all the way through, most of what you get are these little brushstrokes, like one at a time. You get some detail, some beautiful color that, like, it was kind of strange but wonderful the way that that Regina Porter would focus on the most minute details of the most mundane stuff, but it kind of made it you sink into these little stories a bit better when she did that, because it's like, oh, it's not just like a description of the room, like there was a mug here, there was a chair there. It was just like, when you walk into the room, you feel this person felt this way, this is how they experienced that moment in time, and it made those moments feel special, and it kind of allowed you to connect with a character that you didn't necessarily know a lot about, and it made you want to know more about them, or at least made me want to know more about them.
Yeah, I definitely got that feeling. For me, I understand. Well, I understand that, like, the design of the book being short story to short story to short story doesn't lend to what I'm generally used to, which is a ton of backstory.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked more concrete backstory in terms of events for a lot of these characters. Um, but I feel like the in the moment descriptions were very well done. It didn't feel like the the crappy writing style of somebody walks into the bar and, oh, they're about 6 feet tall, they've got brown hair, brown eyes, and they've got a mysterious nature, but like that real quick description that wasn't present. It was subtly done, which is a good way to write it. So I was definitely pleased with the characters, but my own personality, I would have liked more events, more backstory, more defining moments.
So I'm assuming you are going along the lines of what VS Drake said, in that there's very little upfront world building, and you would have preferred a little bit more of that. And I went into this thinking that I was going to have more of that, because again, the first chapter kind of does a bit of that. Like, it feels like you're kind of building something up, and then the second chapter just knocks it all down, and then from there on out, it's very, very different. And it took me some getting used to. I did have to accept that it wasn't going to be that kind of book. And maybe it's just easier for me to accept that because, like you said, it's a personality thing. Like, you like having the world building there. I don't necessarily need it there. It was just a bit jarring for me at first, and it took me a while to accept it. I think maybe that could have been done a little bit better, unless that was the exact intent of the book itself, which we'll never know because we're not the author. But
I think my own personal take on it is there's just too many characters. Like, to have depth, insane depth for every single one of them would have just been a massive book. So I think for what Porter wanted this book to be, I think she did it the right way.
yeah, I would have to agree. And I did like VS Drake said, that Agnes and Eloise's backstories do get kind of told. So we do get some level of resolution at the end of the book. I don't know if it's Game of Thrones level, and I'm
But
like VS Drake said, but like,
I think, like, in terms of size for the book, it would have been Game of Thrones level size for.
what? No,
If
I know what he means by that. I'm just saying, like, if you compare like page number to page number, like to page number to character amount, what's the ratio there? I don't know where you'd wind up, but um, I don't think you had to memorize all of them. I think, again, I really like the way that V.S. Drake put it, where you're just tying people from chapter to chapter. It is nice to be able to remember some of the major ones, like Agnes and Eloise pop up a lot. Rufus and Claudia pop up a lot, but you don't need to know all of like the youngest kids' names all the time. You just kind of have to keep in mind the previous chapter, and it does make it hard to see the book as a whole. And I do think it was a good job of giving us, again, as readers, some level of resolution by taking two fairly prominent characters and giving them some resolution. I I do like the characters that Regina Porter chose. Like, what were to give that resolution on personally? But was there anybody that you felt would have been better, or that you would have liked to have seen more resolution on in particular?
um, I think for me personally, I felt like everybody was fairly explored evenly. Obviously, Agnes and Eloise had a little bit more than everybody else.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the disjointed nature of story chunks kind of didn't lead to immediate resolution. It kind of like you had to wait till they circled back or connected them
Mhm.
with some other story. Um, but no, I think everybody was pretty well tied up.
Oh, before I get to mine, V.S. Drake said they would have liked to have seen more on Claude, which honestly, I think that's a good note. I mean, we do find out what happens to him, but it is very sudden, especially for a guy who went through, he was one of the two characters that went through arguably the most traumatic event in the book.
Yeah.
Um, and to have him just kind of fade away,
Well,
it is tough to let go. I mean,
Claude Claude died.
yeah, I know. I'm saying like him. We get a lot of him up to the point where he proposes to Agnes, and then he just kind of moves away to Boston, and we find out he dies. Like, there's a lot that could be said about like what he did while he was there. It's a little bit implied in how he dies, but you don't really know for sure.
Yeah.
They just say it was a dangerous area, and like we don't even know for sure if that had anything to do with it. It's just how the character processed it when they found out about it. And I agree, that would have been a nice one to know a little bit more about, just again because of the moment that he was present for and the kind of influence he had. But I do think there's a part of this book that does a bit of that on purpose, where you have people who are parts of major events who just kind of fade into the background. Like, that's a part of how life goes. And I don't know, that felt purposeful, because you do get resolution with what happens to them. But like, that's just the way life goes sometimes. And some people who are parts of the biggest events in your life just kind of fade to black. um, Pardon the pun, it was unintentional. um, you know V.S. Drake said it was a robbery, but made it feel like a hate crime. Well, yeah, that's kind of what I meant, is like, we don't know for sure that it was like what the details of it were. And the other thing that popped into my mind is they said it was quote unquote a robbery, but there's a lot of times that, like V.S. Drake mentioned, there's hate crimes that are played off as robberies, or it could have just as easily been something that was described that way when it was. I know back in the day, suicides were often covered up with crimes rather than giving the truth of it. So we don't know what was there, and that might have been nice to see. But I'm mostly with you, Adam, on this. I think most people were fairly well explored. Um, I kind of would have liked to maybe have seen something from uh, a little bit more of the contemporary outlooks. So not just the adults, but I mean, what we get one little bit from one of the kids, like very briefly. Like I'm just kind of curious, like it might have given a sense of what would be next for these people and these characters, like where it could have gone. Because when at the end we circle back to two characters who were there basically in the very beginning, effectively in the beginning, and it doesn't leave us off with anything contemporary. And it felt other than briefly mentioning at the end of Agnes's story that we've reached that Obama era. And I don't know, it kind of would have been nice to hear a little bit from the kids, but like that's the only thing maybe that I thought might have been cool to hear. Yeah, Winnie, that was the one I was thinking of. Actually, thank you, VS Drake. Just a glimpse into what could happen in the future. But maybe that's not what this book was meant to do, and I don't begrudge the author that at all. It just kind of was the thought that popped into my head.
So let me ask you this.
All
Do
right.
you think there was a common theme through the entire book, throughout all the short stories?
You know what? I spent an inordinate amount of time in this book trying to find a singular theme, and I don't know. The closest I ever came to that was this idea that stories are both more and less connected than we'll ever know. That everybody, even the most minor character, has a story. We might think of people as being in the background, but they live whole lives. They live wonderful, terrible, sad, exciting, sometimes even boring lives. And like, I think that's the closest I ever came to a theme with this one. And I don't know, it kind of gave me a better appreciation for the people, like, or at least a curiosity for the people who've come in and out of my own life. Particularly those, again, with like this book specifically prompting this question for me, those with perspectives that are very different from my own. And it's something I realized that I have unintentionally sought out my entire life. So what
Yeah.
about you? What themes did you come up with, if any?
Well, so I was thinking about the name of the book, The Travelers,
Mm-hmm.
and how that relates to everything, like all the little stories. And I think, kind of like what I said at the beginning, and kind of supported by Agnes and who was the other? Eloise.
Yeah.
They both started out in Buckner County, and then they both left and went all over the place, traveled uh, super far away, but both ended up coming back to Buckner County, maybe just for a little bit, but they did both end up at their hometown. And I think that, along with all the other stories, lends to the credence that it doesn't matter what you do with your life. You can always come back to family.
Mm-hmm.
Family's always there for you. And family is what you define. It doesn't have to be blood. It can be whatever you define it as. Whether it is strictly blood, like the one guy who found out his dad wasn't his dad.
Mm-hmm.
He had a bio dad in Buckner County. um, or the the little girl who you grew up with, who wasn't your sister but became your sister because your circumstances led you to living with her, you know.
Mhm.
To me that kind of was the theme for me for the book is uh it just circles around to family.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's definitely a major theme. Family. V.S. Drake makes a good point, and it also shows how how like family traits, flaws, and good qualities move through generations, and how they affect other people. How they don't always manifest in exactly the same way, but they kind of have this origin story. Specifically, V.S. Drake is mentioning James, Ruth, and Hank, um, which I can kind of see, but I also, I kind of like your take, Adam, that it's kind of more of this general um, family connectedness and, um, this idea that you can go anywhere, but you are where you came from. Whether that's the family you chose, the family that you were born with, or even Buckner County. um, you know, uh, and yeah, I think that's a pretty profound insight, though, the family thing, because like I noticed that, but I didn't treat it as with the kind of depth that you did, and I actually appreciate you pointing that out. um,
V.S. Drake can't confirm officially that the entire cast was related, but it definitely felt like they were. Or
Everybody in the cast was linked somehow. They were not all necessarily related by blood, I
I
don't
think
think.
I think they were either all related or knew each other.
Yeah, they all were related or knew each other at some point. That I think that was the point of the whole book, is that these people, their lives are completely interwoven, whether it's just tangential or if it's very directly. And I think that was very much the intent, was for them to all be connected. And I don't know of any characters that don't have at least one connection to somebody else. Um, you know, definitely not all. I mean, I hope they're not all family, because get a little awkward.
Family by marriage counts. I get weird about it. Moving on. Do you have a talking point you want to talk about?
Okay, so given that we are looking into Black History, this is for Black History Month. Um, I don't think we can get. I don't want to leave this completely ignoring the racial side of things, like these racial perspectives. Now, again, I want to preface this by saying we understand that we have a very privileged perspective on this, but I'm wondering if I guess my question is what, if in any ways, did this book open your eyes to the struggles of Black people or mixed race people? You
Um,
know, I'll give you a moment to get the question up there,
I
because
had to
I've
think how to word that. What kind of perspective?
yeah.
Um,
Did this?
yeah.
Yeah. What kind of perspective did this provide for people of color, for you, being a white cisgender male, heterosexual too?
Yeah,
I
thanks.
I think.
I'm married with kids, so
Hey, dude,
anyway,
bisexuality is a thing, man.
with kids.
Bisexuality is a thing, man. Doesn't change anything. But anyways,
Anyway, um, yeah, I think um, that's a tough one because obviously it is hard to relate to certain aspects that we just by birth don't have to deal with.
mhm,
Um, but for me, it kind of did like land that um, privilege aspect home.
mhm,
There was a lot of themes in the book about how certain things just weren't an option, um, like going to school every day, or like the whole cop traffic stop incident. Like, uh, there's some things that we take for granted that we just assume is going to be fine, and we don't have to worry about, that these characters definitely had to worry about, whether it be because of race or poverty, or just general circumstance. Um, it definitely made me realize that, like, there's nothing in my history that's like, oh yeah, I can directly relate to that because this thing happened to me in my past. No, I had a very easy past that was very cushy without flaw. So it made me appreciate that, I think, a little bit more. And I think, um, I hope that if some of some event comes up that is relatable to, the events of this book for somebody else, that I might be able to better relate, and, um, communicate with that person because of reading this book.
Yeah, well, thank you for that perspective. I know it's not always the easiest to bring up, recognizing privilege, because I had the same feeling, and that it kind of made me check in with that. I mean, I've had to do that a number of times because of, like, just secondarily, like through people that I've known, but it's never been, like you said, anything I've ever directly experienced. Uh, I too come from that place of privilege, that there are things that I like that you said, the things that we take for granted. And I really liked that little piece of what you said, because there are things that we absolutely take for granted that are just not a given. Like you said, school, and also to tie this in with, gender norms and sexuality. Like, Eloise was like the trifecta. She was non-heteronormative, black, and a woman, and her experience. It was really interesting to see the things that Regina Porter specifically brought out that were an issue for Eloise, and which ones weren't. Like, and how much she accepted as just being the way things are. Things like the fact that her first major girlfriend was a married woman, and like, as a, you know I'm not sure how that made you feel as a married man, but, like, when it kind of made me rethink, well, what's the context for that, where you can be okay with cheating on somebody, like being in a relationship with somebody who's cheating on somebody else. But the thing is like, when you think context back then, where that just was not acceptable to be in that relationship, both for skin color and for your sexuality, and you combine those two things, and like, your options become so limited. And I start thinking about, well, who am I to want to deny somebody a chance at love, like, or begrudge them wanting that chance at love, rather, because of their circumstance. And that's just kind of the place that she was put, because of the time that she grew up in, the circumstances of her life. It wasn't until Eloise moved to Germany that she really experienced some semblance of actual freedom to be herself. And I can't really imagine what that's like, to have to hide that much of yourself, and just accept that you have to hide that much of yourself.
Do
You
you
know,
do you think her time in Germany made her reticent for her past? Like, wish she had been more, um, accepting of who she was when she was younger?
um, I don't think that was particularly on her mind. Eloise just didn't seem like the type to um, ruminate like that. But I think that's more of a personality thing with her. like she had this connection with Agnes in particular that she was never able to let go, but she was okay with that. She just kind of let it be what it was. I mean, she kept coming back to her, obviously, but she just kind of lived her life separate from that. And if something fit, she would want it to fit. But I don't know. That character never struck me as the live and regret type.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
V.S. Drake says that they think the early years and how people of color and white people interacted was surprising. She, I assume, V.S. Drake is referring to the author, made me feel as a white man the hate for how these white people treated these characters. Um, yeah, that can be a bit of a tough one. I don't want to get too deep into the whole white guilt thing, but like it did make me angry as well. I mean, I know that things like this happened, but Regina Porter did such a good job of making it both visceral and like you had like it was such an emotional reaction to that scenario without giving like too much actual detail about it. And the fact that that's all it took, like the little that it took to make it that visceral, I think speaks to like what that like how much more intense that would have to be to even live through it. And that it's that missing piece, the stuff that we never see is stuff we'll never know, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's and the crazy thing is I know people who can relate to that, who in that scenario they wouldn't have needed to know the details because they've lived them, and that in and of itself is scary because it's just horrible. And the fact that there's people who are more subject to that than others, like no one should be at all, but the fact that there are people out there who are more subject to it than others is despicable.
Yeah.
um yeah, that's effed up for sure.
All right, let's talk story real quick. What I I'm hesitant to say what's your favorite short story, but let's say
Like what
what short story was most impactful for you?
Well, I mean, arguably that second story, Damascus Road. Like I I was somewhat pleasantly relieved and also a little disappointed that that's where at least for me, the emotional climax was for like as far as like the height that you reach for emotionality in this book. But the rest of it, while there were terrible parts, was a lot more healing, and it kind of needed to be because that starting off with that chapter being like the second one was pretty rough. So I think that one and I think Eloise's story at the very end were probably my two that I was most drawn to. Um, these two completely juxtapose like the worst moment in somebody's life and the kind of resolution and freedom that Eloise got. They're completely different, but I think those were probably the two I was most drawn to. What about yourself? Did you have any that stood out?
Yeah, I have to agree with you about the second story. It's it's even though this is a fiction book, like it's very true that like if something like that happened, it would probably derail your entire life. Like,
I mean, it did for Agnes.
and I think it was very well written. It left just enough left out that it left the reader to fill in the blanks, but there was no doubt about what blanks you were filling in. Like, it was it was definitely hard to read and hard to imagine, especially from like, I mean, probably our perspectives. Like I said, like we don't have to deal with that worry from a traffic stop, and um, it's yeah, it's definitely very impactful. But other than that, I really liked one of Eddie's chapters where he had just come home and he's got his two daughters,
Mhm.
and he's not really looking for a job. Um,
Yeah, those ones were really pleasant, weren't they?
yeah. Well, I felt like that one was, um, especially when he started going off about the play and reading it off to the wall and stuff like. Those chapters were interesting to me as a dad of two kids.
Mhm.
I felt like that was more relatable than some of the other chapters that I just have no experience with.
Mhm.
But yeah, those if I had to pick two, that those would be the two. So
Right. Interesting that like you go with the ones that like you most relate to as a dad, and I actually like the two that I chose were the two that I can least relate to.
yeah.
like, um, I mean, there are parts that I can in any given one of them, like little tiny pieces, but um, I believe V.S. Drake mentions that they loved Eddie's chapters like you, Eloise like mine, and Jeb's. And I'm curious, V.S. Drake, if you can clarify for us which of Jeb's, what you liked about Jeb's story. In the meantime, one of the things you brought up that just kind of had this, I just kind of had this thought is, we talk. It's going to be a little bit regressive to our past topic. We talked a bit about like the big noticeable stuff that happens throughout the book that deals with race and other forms of inequality. But honestly, I thought like throughout the book, Regina Porter did a good job of showing the little stuff that happens that just kind of gets accepted and how the little stuff can build up. I mean, that's obviously how Eddie winds up killing a man with Jeb is it was these, well, not necessarily little things, but it was stuff that built up that was just kind of accepted that turned into something big. But then there's other, like even just the tiniest little things that again were taken for granted, as simple as the man James calling his own grandkids mulatto and not realizing that was a an improper term, or the way people looked at Eddie when he was out and about, the way they treated him when he could recite a play, that some of the kids couldn't, you know, just, uh, I can't remember which character was it that actually got involved with the MLK demonstrations.
I'm not sure.
Um,
I'm bad at.
but like, it wasn't anything huge that got I just remember it wasn't anything huge that got him involved. It was the little stuff. It was the look that this guy gave him at the corner store. It was the fact that they just treated him as other in the most subtle ways, and that can't be taken for granted either. And that's just something that goes throughout the whole book. But V.S. Drake answered us and said that he liked Jeb's story because of how it shows how he heals from the past and moves on from the Vietnam murder. And I have to agree, there's a good redemption story there, and it's a fun. I thought it was a little bit. Um, I don't know. Something about it felt a little too. It wasn't simple, but I don't know. Something felt like it was missing there. I mean, I do like that he became, sorry, hiccups, a therapist. Like, I think that was a really cool shift in perspective for Jeb. And I like that it kind of gave him catharsis and allows him to help heal other people. I don't know. There's just something in that story that felt a little bit missing for me. I can't put my finger on it, and I'm not going to in the limited time that we have left in the show. But uh, no, I can see the appeal of that one for sure.
All right,
Uh,
we got time for I think one more topic. If you've got anything you want to talk about, Alex.
All right. So, um, let's see here. There was one other thing. Oh, never mind. I have it in my notes. We already covered it just by incident. Um, uh, I guess I guess we can probably move into our final impressions for now, unless there's something anybody in the chat wants to go over. V.S. Drake makes a decent point. He believes Eloise's chapter should have been the final chapter. I think that's a matter of perspective. I kind of like that she wasn't, because her chapter felt like, made her feel like one of the main characters, and it kind of, I don't necessarily think so. I think it goes with that, at least that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead thing, because, or maybe this is my bias because it's one of my favorite chapters, but I thought it was kind of interesting that Regina Porter took, my favorite chapter, then took the secondary character in that, Agnes, and made her chapter the last one. Same way Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead is the final chapter, final retelling of Hamlet.
Yeah, I'd say I think Agnes's chapter kind of felt more like an epilogue than part of the book.
Yeah, that is a bit true.
But I mean, there was a lot of connections made in her chapter, though. There was a lot of, by the way, so and so is related to so and so in there. So
True, and like V.S. Drake says, like that could have been done earlier, possibly. And it would have been a little bit clunky considering how big that chapter was to do that, and then to end on Eloise's, because Eloise was mostly about her resolution, and I do agree it would have been a cool punchy end to just have her death be the end of that book, the way that it was written, because it was such a good chapter. But I don't know. I struggle to see how it would have been done. Like Regina Porter probably could have. So I guess maybe I was kind of trying to retrofit it in there rather than actually enjoying the placement of Agnes's chapter. um, as far as how I felt about the ending, I kind of agree with Adam that it kind of felt a bit more like an epilogue, like, that punchy ending that V.S. Drake mentioned with Eloise's, and then you just kind of have that, here's our soft landing pad for this doozy of a book. you know
I feel like the ending was very much leading to what I thought the theme was, which was it all comes back to family.
Mhm.
The ending chapter was a lot of people connecting with family. The dude meeting his bio dad, and Agnes meeting her kids coming back, stuff like that. Um, but I felt like that chapter was more of an epilogue than part of the story. So
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought about it that way until you mentioned it, but now that you have, I completely agree with that. I'm not sure exactly what V.S. Drake means here by a discovery writer feel.
a new writer just discovering her.
Oh, okay. We'll assume that's what V.S. Drake means unless they want to clarify, but I don't know. No, okay, we're wrong. Please do clarify. We'll keep things going a little bit while you do that. I I don't know. I don't think every book needs a punchy end. I mean, it would have been cool to have that, but you know, this book, I can't treat it the same way that I would your typical overarching story for uh, okay, V.S. Drake says there's a plotter or planner and a discovery writer, two main writing styles. One plans everything out, and oh, okay, that's what you mean by discovery. Is there's an aha moment here. You know, some like the climax kind of does have to punch you in the face when you do that. I'm not sure that that's what this book was, though. It kind of felt like stories around a campfire where you're just kind of talking to each other, but there's, you know, telling each other stories about people's lives that you know, almost the way that we do the show, really. Like there might be little aha moments here and there, but there's never really like a boom, there's an end. Like it's just not what this book felt like to me.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
I think that's what he means is events lead to events that lead to discoveries. So
Yeah, I think there are some in there. I just don't think the end had to be like that because that's not. I don't know. That didn't feel like the type of book this was to me.
yeah, well,
But you know, if you know, it's a totally valid point for VS Drake though. So the writer discovers the story. I do like stories like that. I think I don't know. I this just the way this book was written, it doesn't feel quite like that. You are meant to discover certain things, but I think it's a journey. I think it's more of a journey you're meant to take just to take the journey, not necessarily. You know, maybe you make some discoveries, but you don't necessarily have to.
yeah. All right. What were your final thoughts of the book?
I thought it was overall a pretty good book. It didn't blow me out of the water, but it did have enough memorable stuff in it that I enjoyed it. I did. It's one that I would recommend to people who are willing to read an unconventional book because it is unconventional in its writing style, and you have to be okay with the fact that there isn't like an overarching plot, and you have to just kind of like people's stories. It's a very casual read for the most part, with you know the obvious trigger warnings in there, but you know I would recommend it to somebody who likes fair like I would classify this almost as like historical fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
You
I think that's the way it's intended to be. It's like I described it as like a fictional biography.
yeah, and if you, yeah, so I would definitely recommend this to people who like biographies, but who like a little bit of like folksy storytelling to it, and who want to get an idea of what it was like to be a black person, you know, in what is effectively modern America.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was my final take. What about yours?
Um, I found the book had its moments that were entertaining, and it had some moments that were kind of thought provoking. But it also had moments for me that were just kind of like, all right, let's move on. I get it, you know. Uh,
Mhm. Yeah, there were parts like that.
I do not normally read books like this. I am very much a sci-fi fantasy guy. So I think that's a big part of my feelings about it. But for me, it's would not recommend. I don't think I would have finished it if it weren't for the show. So
I definitely would have finished it. I do think though that there is a certain type of person that this book is for. It is I can be that type of person. I wasn't prepared to be that type of person initially. But you know,
I think
I do read books like this on occasion. So like I said, it's maybe a little bit more in my wheelhouse. VS Drake says that they would think this book is great for someone who's not a big reader because you can take your time with it, read 10 minutes here or there. Um, and they found it a refreshing change of pace despite the slog of a final chapter. I would tend to disagree with this not being for big readers just because I think you have to appreciate literature to like this sort of book because it doesn't have that satisfying thing that most people look for in a story, and that's a beginning, middle, end. Um, it just not in the traditional way. Uh,
I
I
will
mean,
say
I could be wrong, but
I will say that I think the greatest redeeming factor of the book is that it is really well written.
Yeah.
I think Porter did an excellent job, and she shows that she has great skill as an author, but it just wasn't interesting for me.
Well, it was interesting for me, and I appreciate that it's not going to be for everybody, and that's totally valid. I, via Strike, thank you. I'm glad that you shows that you believe it shows we have, you know, breadth on this show, that we don't just stick to the sci-fi fantasy. And I do like that we did get to do something a little out of our wheelhouse there, because this is the 800s. It's not just high fantasy and sci-fi. It is anything fiction. So if people want to throw out mysteries, or I mean, like, this one would be out of my wheelhouse. Technically, romance novels fit in there too. Um, um, although, like, keep in mind that if you're going to recommend those, it has to be voted on by our Patreon voters. So if you want it in, you're probably going to have to join as a patron and start voting.
I'd be hesitant to call it a romance story.
Yeah, and it's kind of like we'll save it for if we ever have to do that. And
Hang on, I gotta report this let's read Twilight comment real quick and get it out of here. Just kidding.
It's a totally valid book that fits within the 800s. And I'm not angry that it is either.
It has a decibel number that is in the 800s. That is nothing. Anyway, let's move on to the wrap up here.
All right.
So first thing first, a little bit of change of pace. If you guys are watching this for future shows, we're going to change the time of the 800s. So normally we come on at 8 p.m. every other Saturday. We're going to be doing 8:30 p.m. every other Saturday. Just the reason for that is I have a little one, and the other little one is going to bed at 8 right now. So time is tight at 8 o'clock. So I hope that doesn't throw anybody for a loop. I hope to see you at 8:30 for future shows. Speaking of future shows, the Patreon poll, sorry, I couldn't think of the word Patreon for a minute there, is complete, and we have the result, which I am posting into the comment section right now.
Yeah,
we are going to be, what?
Oh, I was going to read it off while you were writing it out.
Go ahead. The next book is going to be Lore by Alexandra Bracken. That's
Sweet.
read by March 6th. I take it that's the one you wanted, Alex.
Yes, that is. Yeah, that's the one that I recommended. That will be our first book for March, and that is actually beginning our women's book month. So all female authors. Speaking of which, there is still probably until end of the day Sunday to get us ideas for if you have potential female authors that you would like to see us look into. And even if it doesn't get into this next vote, we'd love to have more options for later votes down the road. So please feel free to send those in to us. Again, looking for female authors. And I believe next episode's book is Babylon 17.
Yep, Babel 17 by Samuel Delaney.
Babel 17.
Yep. And that one's February 27.
All right. Should be fun. I'll let you go ahead and plug our socials here going into the end.
So as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we have a YouTube channel. We will post this video along with all the other 800 episodes on YouTube. Check us out there. Leave comments on some books that you may have missed, and we'll continue talking about the good books that we have read so far. You can reach out to us on either Facebook or Twitter. We're active on both. Facebook is at the DM's Table, and Twitter is at DM's Table. If you want to talk to us on a more immediate way, you can hit us up on our socials for an invite to our Discord, where we chat about books as well as other nerdy topics. So give us a direct message on Facebook or Twitter, and we'll get you that link for Discord. DMstable.com has all the information about everything that we do, including our other podcast, Roll with Advantage, which just wrapped up not too long ago. And obviously, hit us up on Patreon and give us $2 a month so that you can vote on what book you want to read.
And there may also be other perks down the road, and keep in touch with us, and we can let you know about updates for that as well. All right. So I think that wraps everything up. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, 27th, right, Adam?
Yes, 27th, Babel 17. Read it and join us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Get It Straight.